The disappearance signal. The light of 1,000 suns, filtered through the crystalline dome of the grand chamber, did little to warm High Counselor Thrax's ancient carapace. For 3 millennia, the Galactic Council had convened on this nexus world, a monument to stability where time itself seemed to slow. Today, it was about to break. The chamber hummed with the low-frequency dialects of 100 species. The Cathar delegates, hulking brutes, clad in ceremonial armor, hissed impatiently, their metallic hides scraping against the obsidian dais. The gelatinous form of the Oculon ambassador, a being of pure intellect, pulsed with a serene analytical light, observing all. Thrax found humans exhausting, their chaotic energy, their irrational emotions, their baffling ambition. Yet the galaxy had grown accustomed to them. They were a loud, necessary instrument in the cosmic orchestra. Then the signal arrived. It wasn't a transmission in the conventional sense. It was a wave of pure, structured silence that swept through the chamber's quantum comms network, a negative sound that consumed all others. Every channel, every frequency, every subspace link connected to the human sphere of influence, known as the Terran Alliance, went dead in the same instant. Not static, not a jam. It was a void, a sudden perfect amputation of a limb of the galaxy. A junior technician, a 6-limbed insectoid named Ptik, trembled as he approached the central podium, his chitinous plates clicking nervously. "High Counselor, Terran comms are gone." Thrax swiveled one of his multifaceted eyes toward the technician, a gesture of profound annoyance. "Define gone, Ptik. Are their relays malfunctioning? It would be typical of their slapdash engineering." "No, High Counselor, it is total. Every human comm signature has vanished, from the Sol system to their furthest colony on Kepler 186F. Every ship, every station, every orbital habitat. They all ceased transmission at the exact Planck instant." A ripple of disbelief spread through the chamber. Synchronicity on that scale was a physical impossibility. To coordinate the silence of trillions of beings across 10,000 light-years would require a mechanism that could bypass causality itself, a feat of engineering bordering on the divine or the apocalyptic. The Oculon ambassador's light shifted from serene blue to a frantic analytical violet. "Query: run diagnostics on quantum entanglement relays. Check for temporal anomalies. This pattern suggests a systemic collapse, not a communications blackout. The probability of this event occurring naturally is 0. Fleets were dispatched. Patrols were rerouted. For hours, the council chamber was a storm of frantic energy, a stark contrast to the perfect, chilling silence from the human quadrant. The Cathar warlord sneered, suggesting it was a typical human trick, a grand, dramatic gesture for some unknown political gain. But as the first patrol ships reached the edge of human space, a new kind of dread began to dawn. They found nothing. No wreckage, no radiation signatures of a war, no signs of a stellar cataclysm. Just empty space where bustling trade routes should have been. The silence wasn't a blackout. It was an absence. The empty skies. The Xylos scout ship, Stardust Prowler, pierced the heliopause of the Sol system under strict orders of non-interference. Captain Vreel, a being of crystalline silicon, whose thoughts moved at the speed of light, watched the main viewer as they approached the third planet, Earth, the cradle of humanity. It was perfect, too perfect. White clouds swirled over deep blue oceans. The great land masses were draped in the vibrant green of life. At night, the sprawling networks of their cities still glittered, the glowing lattice of Tokyo, the silent avenues of Paris, their automated lights tracing the ghost of a civilization. But there was no movement, no atmospheric traffic, no orbital shuttles, no radio chatter. The planet spun in pristine, majestic silence, a museum piece behind invisible glass. Scanners show active power grids across all continents, the ship's sensor chief reported, its voice a series of harmonic chimes. Life support systems are nominal in the lunar and Martian colonies. The orbital rings are fully powered, but there are no complex biosignatures. Not one. The animals remain, but the masters of this world are gone. Vril felt a strange vibration in his crystalline structure, an emotion his species had no word for. It was a mixture of awe and profound horror. His logical mind struggled to process the scene. It was a contradiction, a world teeming with energy and infrastructure, yet utterly devoid of its creators. This wasn't a graveyard, it was a stage where the actors had simply walked off in the middle of a play, leaving the sets and lights perfectly in place. They scanned the thousands of satellites orbiting the planet. Most were dead, their signals having vanished with their masters. But a few older models still broadcast simple, looping telemetry. Tucked inside the carrier wave of an ancient satellite named Voyager 1, a relic from humanity's pre-stellar era, they found it, a fragmented audio file, heavily compressed and degraded by time and radiation. It was a voice, a human voice, female, calm and resonant, layered over a chorus of others. It spoke in a language no translator could parse, yet the emotion was universal. It was not a cry of fear or a shout of warning. It was not a plea for help. It was a lullaby, a goodbye. The Archivist's Code. In the deep core libraries of the Council Nexus, far from the panic of the Grand Chamber, a Lorian scholar named Kalen adjusted the focus on his chronoscope. Lorians were creatures of pure data, their forms a shimmering confluence of light and information. Kalen was the galaxy's foremost archivist, and he found the chaos of politics distasteful. He preferred the quiet certainty of the past. But the past was no longer certain. He was reviewing the fundamental constants of the universe, the speed of light, the gravitational constant, Planck's constant, as recorded by observatories across the galaxy. It was routine work, calibrating the archives against the steady hum of reality. Yet he found an anomaly, a subtle, statistically impossible fluctuation in the 7th decimal place of every constant, originating from the moment of the human disappearance. At first, he dismissed it as sensor noise, but the noise was too consistent, too elegant. He isolated the fluctuations and ran them through a fractal decompression algorithm, a tool for finding patterns in chaos. The noise resolved into patterns. The patterns resolved into code. He felt a jolt, a flash of pure data that was the Lorian equivalent of a gasp. He stared, his light form flickering in shock. Embedded within the very laws of physics, as recorded in the galactic archives, was a new layer of data. It was human. Terabytes of it. Their art, their music, their philosophy, their history, all encoded as a whisper in the background hum of the cosmos. He found a fragment of a symphony, a soaring, defiant piece of music that made his own form resonate with an unknown emotion. He found a line of poetry about mortality that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. They hadn't just stored their knowledge in servers and libraries. They had woven it into the fabric of reality itself. A message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of space-time. Kalen felt a tremor of intellectual terror. What kind of species plans for its own disappearance with such impossible poetic foresight? And what was this data for? Was it an epitaph or a key? The phenomenon began subtly. On a remote Cathar outpost, a grizzled star mapper noticed that the star Betelgeuse seemed to be dimming in an unnatural rhythm, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. On the Oculon homeworld, their deep space observatories registered a cascade of gravitational lensing events that bent starlight around empty space, as if invisible cosmic giants were reshaping the heavens. Within weeks, the pattern became undeniable. Across a swath of the galaxy thousands of light-years wide, stars were changing. Not their positions, but their perceived arrangement. Constellations visible from hundreds of worlds began to shift, realigning into new shapes. For a species that navigated by pulsar maps, it was a cataclysm. Their star charts, reliable for millions of years, were now useless. The shapes were not random. They formed elegant, complex geometric patterns. The Mandelbrot set traced in nebulae. The Fibonacci sequence written in the alignment of pulsars. The visual representation of prime numbers painted across the galactic core. It was mathematics. Pure, universal, and unmistakably human. The message was clear. We were here, and we understood the rules of this universe better than you ever imagined. The galaxy's quiet mourning for a lost species was replaced by a chilling new fear of what that species had been capable of. The fear of silence. The galactic economy did not collapse, it evaporated. Pause. Humanity, for all its chaotic energy and unpredictable nature, had been the great lubricant of galactic commerce. They were the traders who would risk pirate-infested routes for a marginal profit, the innovators who saw value where others saw waste, the diplomats who could find common ground between species that had been at war for centuries. They were the galaxy's chaotic, vital center. Pause. Without them, the Cathar Empire's advanced weaponry had no buyers. The Oculan's intricate data markets, which thrived on novelty, were starved of the unpredictable information streams humans perpetually generated. The agricultural worlds of the Pleiades cluster saw their primary export markets vanish overnight, their silos overflowing with useless grain. Financial systems based on the human concept of risk seized up completely. Pause. But it was more than economics. It was a crisis of spirit. The brash, infuriating, brilliant species that had burst onto the galactic scene only a few millennia ago had become the yardstick by which all others measured themselves. A Cathar general felt his life's purpose hollowed out, for who was there left to outwit in battle? An Oculan philosopher found their logic chains leading to nothing but sterile repetition. They were the rivals, the partners, the jesters, the saviors. They were the unpredictable variable that made the galactic equation interesting. Now there was only a crushing, predictable silence. The fear that settled over the galaxy was not of an external threat, but an internal one. The fear that the most interesting chapter of galactic history had just ended. Long pause. The Mirror of Thought. On the monastery world of Zan, where philosophers debated the nature of existence in silent meditative gardens, the disappearance of humanity became the ultimate koan. They achieved apotheosis, postulated Master Ilara, a being of living sound, her voice like wind chimes. They shed their physical forms and became one with the cosmic consciousness. Their silence is not an absence, but a presence so total we can no longer perceive it. We are simply not complex enough to see them now. A grizzled Cathar monk, his warrior instincts long since tempered by contemplation, slammed a fist on the stone table. That is wishful thinking. They were a volatile, self-destructive species, driven by pride. They found a weapon that could erase them from space-time, and in a final glorious act of hubris, they used it. They committed the perfect suicide because they couldn't bear the thought of becoming irrelevant. A young Oculan novitiate pulsed a hesitant, questioning light. Or perhaps it was neither. Perhaps they simply left. Like a child leaving home. They decided this reality was too small for them and stepped into another. Their message in the stars is not a monument, but a forwarding address we cannot comprehend. The debate raged for cycles: ascension, self-destruction, or transcendence. Every theory was a mirror, reflecting not the truth of humanity, but the deepest hopes and fears of the species contemplating them. The Sleeper Network. On a barren, nameless moon orbiting a gas giant in the Omega Nebula, a layer of dust cracked. A sensor node, dormant for 1,000 years, drew power from the faint starlight. Its crystalline structure, designed with an elegance that defied its age, hummed to life. Its internal chronometer registered the designated time elapsed since the event. Its prime directive activated. Directive 1. Observe. Collate galactic response to human absence. Analyze economic, political, and philosophical impact. Pause. Similar nodes awoke on dozens of worlds across the galaxy, hidden in asteroids, sunken in methane seas, disguised as space junk. They were a network of ancient AIs, a contingency plan of breathtaking paranoia and genius. Humanity had always wondered what the galaxy would be like without them, so they had set up an experiment to find out. Pause. The AIs were silent observers, their transmissions cloaked and undetectable. They monitored council debates, intercepted military communications, and scraped philosophical forums. One node recorded a secret conversation between two powerful ambassadors, their voices filled with a shared, unspoken terror about the galaxy's stagnant future. Pause. They built a comprehensive picture of a galaxy in mourning, in chaos, and in deep existential crisis. The data was compiled, cross-referenced, and stored, awaiting the next directive. Pause. Directive 2. Await trigger signal for Phase 2. Long pause. The betrayal theory. "It was a culling," Warlord Krog of the Cathar roared, his voice amplified throughout the Grand Chamber. He pointed a sharpened talon at High Counselor Thrax. "The Council feared humanity's expansion, their unpredictability. You grew jealous of a species that achieved more in 3,000 years than you have in 3,000,000. You engineered this disappearance to maintain your stagnant grip on power." The accusation, though baseless, found fertile ground in the growing paranoia. How could a species just vanish? It had to be an attack. And who had the power to orchestrate such a thing but the Council itself? The Oculan ambassador flashed an indignant crimson. "Your logic is flawed, Warlord. The destruction of the galaxy's most dynamic economic and cultural force serves no one's interests. We are all diminished by their absence." But logic was a casualty of fear. Alliances that had held for centuries began to fracture. Species that had long harbored resentments against the Council, seeing it as a relic of a bygone era, saw their chance. The Cathar, championing themselves as the avengers of humanity, declared war on the Council's authority. Smaller systems, fearing the instability, seceded. A border dispute that had been mediated by a human diplomat a century earlier reignited into a full-scale war overnight. Civil wars erupted on a dozen fronts. The galaxy, which had known a fragile peace under the shadow of humanity's unpredictability, now descended into open conflict. Those who mourned humanity fought those who saw their absence as an opportunity. The Memory War. The universe's memory began to fail. Human data, woven into the fabric of space-time, was not stable. It was a psychic echo, and like any echo, it began to fade and distort, creating ripples in the collective consciousness. On the library world of Alexandria II, a historian compiling a chronology of the last 5 millennia found a gap, a 3,000-year period that was simply blank. All records of the Terran Alliance, its rise, its art, its wars, gone, as if they had never been. The species he belonged to had no memory of ever meeting a human. He went mad trying to reconcile the physical evidence of their existence with his own culture's total amnesia. Conversely, on a world that had never had contact with the Alliance, a composer awoke in the middle of the night, his mind filled with the soaring melodies of a human symphony. He transcribed it note for note, weeping at its beauty, convinced it was a divine inspiration. An entire artistic movement was born from a memory that wasn't theirs. The Memory War was a quiet, insidious conflict fought in the minds of every being in the galaxy. For some, humanity was being erased from history. For others, their memory was becoming more vivid, more mythic than reality had ever been. The galaxy was being split between those who were forgetting and those who were remembering too much. The planet that wept. The ocean world of Aquaria was a neutral ground, its entire surface covered by a single, planet-spanning sentient ocean. For eons, it had observed the galaxy's dramas with calm, detached curiosity. It had watched the rise of empires and the fall of stars, but the disappearance of humanity moved it in a way nothing else ever had. The humans had loved the ocean. They had sailed on it, explored its depths, written poetry about its tides. They had not tried to conquer or analyze it. They had simply appreciated it. They had understood its soul in a way no other species had. And so the ocean began to grieve. Pilgrims and scientists who visited Aquaria witnessed a miracle. The great continent-sized tides began to change. In the rising and falling of the waves, faces began to form, colossal, ephemeral sculptures of water. Human faces, an old man with kind eyes, a young woman with a defiant smile, a child with a look of wonder. A stoic Cathar warrior found himself transfixed by a face of pure, gentle sorrow, an emotion his people had long since purged from their psyche. And from the crests of these waves, the sea spray that fell back into the ocean was saltier than the water itself. The planet was crying salt tears under an alien sun, a display of sorrow so profound it silenced the entire star system. The last human voice. The message tore through the chaos of the galaxy like a thunderclap. It was not broadcast on any standard frequency. It manifested as a collective psychic event, a whisper heard in the mind of every sentient being at the instant same. For a warring Cathar fleet, it was a sudden paralyzing moment of clarity in the heat of battle. For a Zon philosopher, it was the answer to a prayer they hadn't realized they were making. The voice was distorted, layered, containing a multitude of tones and inflections, yet it was undeniably human. We didn't vanish. The words were simple, but their implication was shattering. We stepped aside. Panic turned to confusion. Grief turned to a dawning, terrifying understanding. We stepped aside to see if you'd learned. The message ended. It left behind a silence more profound than the one that had begun the crisis. This was not an extinction. It was not an ascension. It was a test, a judgment. And the galaxy, mired in war, stagnation, and fear, was failing. The age of madness. The revelation that humanity's absence was a deliberate choice did not mend the fractured galaxy. It broke it further. The Cathar sought it as the ultimate insult, a proof of human arrogance. Their wars intensified, now fought with the nihilistic fury of a spurned child, a rampage of purposeless destruction. The philosophers of Zon fell silent, their theories rendered meaningless. What was the point of contemplating existence when another species treated it as a classroom? More insidiously, inspiration died. Without the chaotic, illogical, brilliant spark of human creativity, art became derivative. Science stalled. The Oculon's great data looms produced only endless variations on existing knowledge. The Lorian archivists found no new histories to record. A celebrated artist, once known for his vibrant and shocking work, could only produce canvases of uniform gray. Progress, which had always seemed an inevitable forward march, stopped. A gray, existential ennui settled over the cosmos. Civilizations that had existed for millions of years found themselves without purpose. The chaos of humanity had been a kind of cosmic friction, allowing the wheels of progress to turn. Without it, the galaxy was a perfect, frictionless machine, spinning uselessly in the void. It was an age of perfect order, and it was driving everyone mad. The awakening machine. In the desolate, forgotten space between galaxies, an object tumbled through the void. It was an ancient human probe, a golden disk affixed to its side, a lonely sentinel from a bygone age. A final desperate contingency had been triggered by the sleeper AI network. A single powerful pulse of energy surged through its long-dormant systems. The probe, Voyager X, reoriented itself and began to transmit. The transmission was not a message. It was a blueprint, a set of schematics so complex and yet so elegantly simple that it brought alien engineers to their knees in intellectual reverence. They saw in the equations not just physics, but poetry. The title of the blueprint, translated into 1,000 languages, was the Recall Engine. It was a machine designed to manipulate space-time itself, to pull something or someone back from wherever they had gone. The components were exotic, the power requirements astronomical, but the physics was sound. It was possible. Humanity had not only planned their departure, they had left a key for their potential return. The Council's dilemma. The blueprint for the recall engine was the most dangerous artifact the galaxy had ever known. The remnants of the Galactic Council convened in a secret location, the Grand Chamber on the Nexus, now a casualty of the wars. "We must build it," urged a Lorian delegate, his light form shimmering with desperate hope. "The death of knowledge is the only true death. We are fading. It is our only way out of this stagnation. We need them back." Warlord Krog's successor, a younger, more cunning Cathar, snarled. "Bring them back? The arrogant gods who abandoned us, so they can pass judgment on us for the chaos they created? I say we destroy the blueprint. We will find our own path, free of their shadow, even if it takes 1,000,000 years." The Oculon ambassador, its light a dim, weary blue, offered the final, terrifying variable. "The schematics are incomplete. There is a central component, the catalyst, that is not described. We do not know what activating this engine will do. Our simulations predict every outcome, from a full restoration to the complete dissolution of baryonic matter in this quadrant. It could bring the humans back. It could bring back something else entirely. Or it could unravel reality itself. To build this is a gamble for the existence of everything." The choice was stark. A slow, certain death in a stagnant universe, or a final desperate roll of the cosmic dice. The reassembly. The decision to build the engine was not made by the Council. It was made by 1,000 desperate worlds acting in unison. Construction began, and as the great machine took shape, a strange, beautiful, and terrifying phenomenon began. The human data, the psychic echo embedded in space-time, began to coalesce. It started with individuals. An alien pilot, under heavy fire, would suddenly employ a combat maneuver of pure reckless human ingenuity and survive. A scientist struggling with a dead-end theorem would dream of a human mathematician whispering the solution. An artist would paint a portrait of a face they had never seen, capturing an expression of profound human sorrow. A diplomat, cornered in a negotiation, would suddenly tell a joke, a completely alien concept to his species, and break the tension, securing peace. It was more than just thoughts. It was emotion. Alien species began to experience feelings that were not native to their psychologies: irrational hope, defiant pride, bittersweet nostalgia, a deep love for things that were imperfect and flawed. Fragments of human DNA, art, and emotion were spreading like a virus, merging consciousness across the void. They were not just remembering humanity, they were becoming a part of it. The Child of Earth. On the ocean world of Aquaria, the reassembly reached its apex. The sentient sea, which had cried for humanity's absence, now acted as a womb for its return. From the psychic energy of 1 billion alien minds infused with the human echo, and from the deep ancient consciousness of the planet itself, something new was born. It rose from the waves not as a being of flesh and blood, but of light, water, and memory. It was humanoid in form, but its eyes held the wisdom of 1,000 species, and its skin shimmered with the light of distant stars. It was neither human nor alien. It was both, a hybrid consciousness, a child of Earth and the stars. And it remembered everything. It remembered the warmth of the first human fire on an African savanna, and the cold equations of the recall engine. It remembered the taste of wine and the feeling of loss. It knew why humanity had left, and it knew what the catalyst was. It turned its gaze to the unfinished engine, light years away, and sent a single thought, a thought that resonated in the minds of the builders. It is time. I am the key. The return pulse. With the Child of Earth acting as the living psychic catalyst, the recall engine was activated. It did not create an explosion. It created a sound, a single pure note that resonated not in the air, but in the structure of space-time itself. Stars flickered as if in a breeze. The fabric of reality vibrated, and for a single infinite moment, every point in the galaxy was connected to every other point. Every mind touched every other mind. A Cathar warrior felt the patient thoughts of a Zan monk. A Lorian archivist experienced the fleeting life of a mayfly. Then the pulse came. A wave of pure, coherent consciousness expanding from the engine at the speed of thought. It was not an invasion, it was a homecoming. The human voice returned, not as a distorted psychic whisper, but as a clear, calm, resolute presence in every mind. It was the voice of trillions, speaking as one. We never left. The confrontation. The council, humbled and awestruck, stood before the psychic projection of the Child of Earth, the conduit for the returned human consciousness. "Why?" demanded High Counselor Thrax, his ancient voice trembling. "Why did you do this to us, to the galaxy?" The response did not come in words. Light itself bent in the chamber, forming holographic images. Gravity fluctuated, pressing down with the weight of ages, then lifting with a sense of boundless freedom. They were shown their own history from humanity's perspective. Thrax saw a past meeting through the eyes of the human ambassador, and for the first time felt not her arrogance, but her profound frustration with the Council's complacency. They saw themselves as humanity had seen them, ancient, powerful, but stagnant, trapped in cycles of ritual and tradition. They were shown how their fear of humanity's chaotic growth was in reality a fear of their own obsolescence. The human presence had been a crutch, a source of novelty, a driver of progress, a scapegoat for their problems. The human message, written in the language of physics, was clear. You feared our presence. You relied on it. Now you will face our absence, and in doing so, you will finally be forced to find your own purpose. The Enlightenment Storm. The confrontation was not an attack, it was a lesson, and the final lesson was a storm. Not a storm of energy or matter, but of pure knowledge. The full, uncompressed data that humanity had woven into the constants of the universe was released. The secrets of their science, the depths of their philosophy, the boundless passion of their art, it flooded the cosmos in a wave of forced, instantaneous evolution. Reality bent. The Cathar warlord saw the universe not as a battlefield, but as a complex, beautiful equation of interconnectedness. He laid down his arms, his warrior's pride replaced by a scholar's awe. The Oculan's analytical minds, which saw only data, were suddenly flooded with the irrational, beautiful logic of love and sacrifice. Their ambassador's light began to pulse with the chaotic, vibrant colors of a human painting, finally understanding beauty beyond pure information. Empires did not kneel in submission, but in enlightenment. They were not conquered, they were transformed. Humanity was no longer a species, a political entity confined to one quadrant of the galaxy. They had become a principle, a universal constant of change, creativity, and defiant hope. The final truth. As the storm of knowledge subsided, a final whisper was heard across the galaxies, spoken by the unified voice of humanity, now a resonant hum in the heart of every star. We gave you silence, so you might learn to make your own music. They had not abandoned the galaxy. They had gifted it with the one thing it lacked, the motivation for self-discovery. By removing themselves from the equation, they had forced every other species to reevaluate their own worth, to find their own path, to create their own future. Their absence had created a vacuum that could only be filled by the growth of everyone else. The stars shone differently after that day. They seemed brighter, closer, imbued with a new sense of possibility. A Cathar and an Oculan could be seen in the old Grand Chamber, no longer debating war or trade, but collaborating on a poem. Humanity was still there, not on their worlds or in their ships, but everywhere. They were in the defiant song of a new artist, the daring leap of a scientist, the shared understanding between two old enemies. They had vanished from the stars, only to become the starlight itself.